Good evening. I can't see your faces, but I trust that you are there. And it was nice to see some familiar faces when I walked in. Thank you for coming back. And thank you especially to Professor Daniels and Professor Lee for inviting me and for sharing your students with me. I hope you all know how lucky you are to be mentored by such talented writers and teachers. Thank you to Michelle and to all the students who have been so patient with me and generous and forgiving and for eating lunch with me and for taking such good care of these poems, and to all the people that have sort of organized this visit and been driving me around and tending to me. Thank you. It's been a lovely visit, and I'm far, far from home. So thank you for making sure I'm okay. I think I just want to say a couple of things sort of to frame, or as a sort of preface before I read to you. Things that I just generally believe to be true. And one is that poetry, and especially poetry readings like this one, really matter. And I think it's a source of real health for a community, considering that so much of our daily lives are really a lot of noise and haste, sound and fury. It really seems more important than ever to sort of have a space holding like this. It seems that whatever the demands of poetry are, that we might enter into wonder, that we might ask questions, pay better attention, are really in line with the demands of the soul. And what harm would it do any of us to tend to matters of the soul? And I just think, especially in this current climate of anxiety and what seems to be daily crisis, it seems more important than ever that there are moments like this. I said to the class earlier today that each year the mainstream media predicts the death of poetry, the same way they predict the death of the printed book and the newspaper, and even the death of the need for human teachers as everything becomes digitized and virtual. And yet, poetry is ever resilient and real and requiring humans that I don't, it continues to defy its predicted demise. And I think in times of national crisis and tragedy, in times of personal mourning, at weddings and at funerals, in times of your profound grief and your profound joy, it's poems, that call to you the same way, or music, that all sort of the arts become a sort of mediator for us. And I tend to believe that as long as there are people who fall in love and then also break up, as long as we outlive our loved ones and bury our dead, there will be poems. It's how we're made. So I just want to say that I really believe events like this are vital, and your being here is important to your thriving. I believe that. For me, these readings like this are really hopeful reminders that things that are supposed to matter do actually matter. Jane Hirshfield is one of my favorite, my current favorite contemporary poets, and she's the one who sort of planted the seed with me, and sort of what I was talking about with some of the students, this idea of the deceptive uselessness of poetry. This idea that you can't eat a painting, and that poetry can't put a roof on a house, or feed the hungry, or bandage the bleeding. But what it does do is sort of distinguish for us the difference in surviving and thriving, and that the use of poetry there's nothing to do with the poem, the way there's nothing to do when you stand before a painting, except to behold it and sort of notice that the world has shifted, even fleetingly, and that you are also changed. You know, that's what will save us. I think poems are reminders that we exist, and that it restores our ability to be amazed, to make meaning, to ask questions, to behave better, to be better citizens. I of course don't know that any of my poems do any of that. And, you know, if you start writing poems thinking that that's your real task, you know, that you've got to save us all, that's sort of crippling, you know, to think that the stakes are that high. And in some ways they really aren't that high. Poems are meant for pleasure, you know. But on the other hand, like, why not have the stakes be that high? It's all to say that what you're doing is exactly what will save us. So this book, To See the Queen, it feels far away from me, and also not. I mean, it's a few years old, but I'm not quite so heartbroken, I think, or so. The world doesn't seem as haunted. But I think there will always be something of these poems, no matter how many years go by, that are sort of inextricable from my identity. The short version, and I sort of battle with this, but the short version concerning this book, I tried for a long time to sort of evade saying this directly, but truthfully, the honest sort of address is that I was sick, and I had what doctors called a psychotic break. I hallucinated, and I went through this period of time, some months, where I had a difficult time navigating or determining what was this real world and what was some other world. Things got blurred. So this book is sort of an attempt to chronicle that experience, which to this day remains the most mysterious experience of my life. I would say it attempts to understand it, but I don't know that that's possible. You know, I think we all might have moments of our life or experiences of our life that sort of surpass anything you can comprehend, much less articulate, much less say in a poem that makes any sense. So that's sort of the most direct way I can sort of explain what these poems are about, or sort of what the subject is. I mean, of course, I think all poets hope that their poems are not just about themselves. I think that the best art invokes something particular, but in order to transcend it. So it would be my hope that the poems are not simply about me and my suffering, or one woman's difficulty, but that they speak to larger questions, about divinity and mystery and illness and recovery. That is the hope. And so I'm just they really work better if I don't interrupt myself, which is probably why I'm sort of front-loading my explanation, but I just think they work better if I move sort of seamlessly. So I'm going to read some from the first section, which is called Liliana. And Liliana was the name of this hallucinated figure. I never knew why it was her name. The way, if you're a person who dreams and you've had characters or something appear in your dreams that had names or looked a certain way, they just are true in your dream. You don't get to know why. You don't get to know why someone appeared, much less what their name was. Or if you're in a particular place, you don't question the dream about why you were at the amusement park or why you were in a farm tree. They just become sort of part of the truth of it. So her name was Liliana, and I never knew why. It was months after I finished the manuscript that I, sort of by accident, was looking at my name, what my name Allison meant. And the variations include Eliana, and also Liliana, which was a real moment of clarity for me, that you would sort of hallucinate a figure that is not me but a variation of me. Somehow that was, you can't make that up, you know. And then the real miracle is that the translation of Liliana is God has answered, which to this day gives me chills to say out loud. You know, it's almost like literally unbelievable that. So it's sort of spooky. So I'm going to read from Liliana. Now, beginning with the figment. The figment. If I am still enough, I see Liliana, a figment. I try to tell her about sadness. I try to be specific. I say, God is abusive. I say, when my lover said he no longer loved me, I felt I was covered in ropes. But then she vanishes, as God does. Or she returns in a different form, this time as an avalanche, a ledge of snow, slipping from the roof of a warehouse into even more snow. I will tell her next, I think that is one way of living, slipping off into some indistinguishable state of more and more snow. Thank you for changing. The Queen. The figment is the same as the sadness sometimes. Wild gold and dark red, the color of snow under a street lamp, or of smoke pluming from a house under a white sky in the morning, the color of a queen. I try to keep her even while she is leaving, and even after I know she has left. I shout, are you there? Are you even there? Meaning God, but also Liliana. I want to ask her which is worse, dying or being dead. And then I can see her floating away as down a hill of ice. With her, she has one half of my whole being. She holds me high above her head, and I wave to myself like a flag. The sadness. Other times, the figment is God. We discuss choices that would leave me not unhappy, keep the darkness in the near distance. But then when I am on the brink, God becomes a crystal song, a hymn in the piano's high octaves. Or God is the smell of apple soap in the morning, or the feel of sun on a horse's back, pure and kind. He enters the strange field of my mind, the way, after a long day of silence, the voice trembles in the throat and enters the air like a shy animal. When I look at myself in the mirror, there is no answer. In one eye, God lives with me. In the other, there is the bright, loud world below, my figure on the sill of a window. God's woods. The worst part of seeing figments is not seeing them. My life is not so hard except for that. Alone in a world which moves around me as a silent film, or is too far away to touch, or is as a fantasy. I am as distant to myself as someone I read about, which is to say the worst part of knowing I exist is not knowing whether I am or am not a figment. I'll just read a couple more from this section. Bathing. I have been alone with the thing itself, the depression, the defective part, God. Inside my mind it is dawn. A wolf appears with a bird in its mouth. Blue feathers, my fate, the beautiful white throat. The difficult way. The difficult way is mouthful by a little mouthful. Soft, soft, loud, a string of sweet autumnal days, and then a day of nothingness, only numb, gray brimming, hours upon hours, etc., etc. When it feels people are standing closer to me than I am standing to them, what do they all do, the people, when they are alone with their lives? I wish I could arrange the disturbances of my life, one mouthful of things to think about, and another of things not to. The foolish from the grave, the jealousy from the love. Arrange things as though one did not have to be disturbed if one wished not to be. To swallow the difficulty or not. When I go to the end of the road, it tastes like aloneness in my mouth, sour, thirsty, thick iron, someone else's smoke, and there is nothing in the box. And I come back inside and smooth the newel post and rest on the last stair. And this is what it is like to wait for and not get the letter, no sign from you. It was so flattering to walk into the classroom and see this little book on the desks of people. And I always like to mention the cover because I joked once to my editor that if anyone ever bought the book, it might be because of the cover. This spooky doll on the front, which the title of that doll, I think it's listed, is Imaginary Body Parts, which I just thought was so brilliant. This woman, Laura Ferris, she's a brilliant artist and a doll maker, but I mean these like spooky dolls, you know. And I always loved her work, and so when I didn't get total say over the cover, but I said you should look into Laura Ferris's work. And someone said, what about this doll? And so it was sort of, I don't know, it also seems sort of God-given that her name would be Imaginary Body Parts, and for a book that is about imagining bodies. So anyway, I always like them to acknowledge her as being here. I met the artist, Laura Ferris, when I was living in Lynchburg, which is a beautiful city. I mean, an exquisite city in a sort of hill town in Virginia. But I called it the city of broken everything because I was so sad there and everything was sad. And I hated everybody and everything was sad. But even though it was very beautiful, and I had this sort of ridiculously luxurious teaching schedule. I only taught Tuesdays and Thursdays. I only taught poetry writing, and I had 18 students total. Sort of ridiculous. That was okay. And I lived in this sweet house. I mean, there was nothing that I should have been sad about, but I could not. I just totally unraveled, probably because I had too much time on my hands. But it was this, the geography of that city, I realized really mattered to me in a way that geography might not have mattered to me before, or that I took for granted or something. And there's really no city like it, at least not that I know. And it was like out of a fairy tale, but in a scary way. And there was this feral cat colony across the street from me, and they would sleep on my porch. And so every morning, I'd open my door, and like 12 cats would scatter in all directions. And it really felt like something wicked happening. It was like mythic. And then it was one of those cities where you can put furniture on the side of the road, and people will come take it. This is the town. And for whatever reason, that town just seems extreme. Like whole rooms seem to like appear in ditches. Like everything was bizarre in that city. And so this notion of like my sort of personal, a sort of psychic landscape that was sort of married to this strange, outward landscape became a different sort of geographic metaphor, I guess. So this, I realized that was probably why like animals and weather and seasons kept sort of reappearing. I don't think I realized like the effect that had. So I'll just read a couple from this section, which is called Geography of God's Undoing, which is like the subtitle of Lynchburg. And it includes these sort of bleak, heartbreak poems, which are complicated versions of the same story you all know. Or if you don't know yet, you will eventually. That sometimes love is not enough. And that sometimes even people who love one another can't keep living with one another. And it's a particular kind of agony. And some things you just don't get over no matter what people tell you. Some things are not get overable. So I'll just read you a few from this sort of more despairing section. I also realized that you may not know the plant bougainvillea. It's sort of a hot weather. You see a lot of beaches, and I always liked it for its metaphoric value because it's like really resilient. It's like drought tolerant, and it doesn't mind the cold, and it flowers no matter what. It's like this sort of metaphor of it, which of course makes me sad. But anyway, so I realized that you may not know bougainvillea. This is a town of unspeakable things. Then there was the time I looked directly into the face of the life I thought I was missing, of love. I used to think to be not alone meant never having to walk through the high wheat or struggle in the water, not having to decide not to fling from some height. Once, the two of us rode one bicycle. I wore a straw hat perched on the handlebars, and beside us the cedar swayed like skirts, and I heard a trilling in the crabgrass. The sidewalks were bleached as Grecian stone as we rode past the fish shop smelling of morning, salt, bread, limes, men. Riding in front was such that I could not be heard always, at least not the first time, for you pedaled into the wind, and my hair was a ribbon in your eyes. I said I thought bougainvillea was a stoic plant, and then had to say twice, no, stoic, and then no, the bougainvillea. And then you said easily, it was nothing like that at all. But our future was clear enough when I asked if you saw the clean aprons of those men. How much longer, you think, until they cleaned the fish? Did you see how white those aprons were? Did you see? To which you said, how much is it, then, you think you need? Town of longing. The cicadas loud inside and out, the trees darkness against a lesser dark sky. There is a melancholy band practicing 3 houses down, playing one song all night. All the lowly lit bungalows looking drowsy, the dogs and a cloud of cats. The maples ablaze one leaf at a time, and no one ever sure of anything any given night. Clink of bottles or porch door slap, sometimes a different voice or curved car, something other than what we are used to. In my case, for example, for a few days, they may have heard a man's low moan from my open window and wondered who before had we not noticed. What in the world is she doing? Who is that man who comes before dawn and leaves in the afternoon? But we were our own time, own sound, until that was quieted too, and things resumed, and fall came usually. And still I am as unsure as the rest of them. I never understand how to figure one routine, then another, accreted over time, continuous, until it is life itself. In other words, the beauty. Town of small fields. What I want to describe for you is the nest I found fallen among the wineberries and the sparrows that flew through the bean fields, the one I decided to name for you. And as I was walking, how I remembered you in the early morning at the window with your coffee and fruit, the red checked tablecloth, and how I understood for that moment the story of how we came together and tore apart, how I began to feel it in the dark, how whatever was between us had worn thin as the nest threads, until what had once been how we lived had unraveled as marvelously as it had been made, thing by small thing, hour by hour, and mostly without witness. The students have asked some really insightful questions, but one was about titles that I don't know if we really ever got to, but titles are so easily dismissed, and they vary in their necessity. Sometimes you can do without. Other times, your understanding of the poem depends, almost exclusively on your noticing the title. So sometimes they operate as their own line of poetry. In the case of this book, I'll tell you what I told them, that whenever it was I learned that stanza was Italian for room, it sort of changed my life irreversibly, and it changed the whole way I thought about the way poems were made and the way stanzas build on other stanzas, and that this idea of poems having rooms, which meant that poems were a kind of house, and then to extend that metaphor that houses live in towns, and you can sort of go on, and that sort of kept my attention for a long time. So a lot of the titles have town in that section, and then the third section, I called it Room of the Queen's Dreams, and it sort of moves inward. I sort of think of the shape of the book as this sort of alternating, telescopic, myopic shifting. So the second, the towns maybe go further. I'm not sure how to explain what my vision was, but then this third section, The Room of the Queen's Dreams, has a lot of room in the title. And in some ways, I think the third section might be the most hopeful. And it's a kind of reconciling of the first. Liliana comes back. And one thing I realized is that, as I was making a manuscript, that the poems in the third section were actually my oldest poems, which seems sort of hopeful to me, that I would be writing the ending of the sadness first, sort of beginning with the ending, like something about that coupled with the subject matter felt like a sort of moment of mercy. That took me a long time to figure out. When I say it, it sounds maybe like sort of obvious or something. But it seemed, when your subject is despair, moments like that deeply sort of divine. So the title poem opens this third section, To See the Queen. Since I was the one who had been ill, it was she who came to see me. Everyone wanted a glimpse of her. The people emerged from their houses toward mine, and with such caution, they made a visor of their hands. It was as if they were to be accounted for, wading the long uphill, little moving triangles, all I could distinguish at first. But the queen came to see only me, and I saw her, and my life for a while was forgotten, and so repaired. Time of need. I always have a sort of special fondness for this poem. It was the very first poem I published a year after graduate school. So it's my first poem. Time of need. In the road, a dog. Days dead, that dog. Liliana was walking beside me a while, I am sure. And I was almost not crying, but then found what I was looking for. She heaved it for me, all of it, the stench, the weight, in her thin arms until it was too much. Tired, she dragged the thing by its wasted paws all the way home. Her dress was stained. This is how I learned about love. She did not mind at all the silent, steady distance I placed between us. Secret room. In another life, I ended myself, and in another, I keep not dying. Another, I am unlacing the animals, pulling a rope through the grass, happy and thoughtless. And yet another, I am my mother, ripping page after page from the magazine, saying, this is what I want, this is what I want. Or I am painting a painting and no one understands what I say for the nail in my mouth. In any of the lives, there is always the figment, sitting in the living room or up against the walls. Sometimes she is even with me in my sea-dark bed, and I jerk her around and ask her questions in some other language, a language my real self does not know, but that the sadness knows. The language sounds like banging on an empty box or on the bottom of a boat moored. Underground room. They packed me in by the bucketful and then by the handful until even my hair was buried in sand. As they drank their beers underneath the umbrella, my tiny face, shell, was almost forgotten. Though the tide inched forward and the sand caved tighter, it was never quite unbearable, the breathing. And if the people moved out of sight or fell silent too long, all I had to do was yell, someone, and a voice would call back, yes. And it was not yet a metaphor for anything. Someone asked me today if I wrote the poems while sort of in this crisis, and I said that no, I didn't and couldn't. And it struck me later that it would be more true to say that I can't write the poem if I'm in the poem, you know. And I think some people might manage that better, but I think if you're living inside of it, if your life is the poem, you can't write about it until you're somehow outside. I'll just read the last two of the book, and then you're being so attentive. Would love if you could indulge me and allow me to read some new work, because you would be the first to hear it and be its witness. And of course, if you can stay, I'd love to have this turn into more of a question and response. See, I'm not saying question and answer because I don't have any answers, but I can respond. More of a question and response sort of situation. So I'll sort of end this book with the last two poems. We become what we behold. Liliana is a dream each night, like God, like my youth. Her beauty is a torment. In the dream, she is the flute girl, the mill girl, the queen unpinning her crown. And the secret to the sadness is there bewitching our brains, like gentle animals. The secret is somewhere along the long gaze of her body I cannot touch. And I go swimming inside her. Each night, the secret swimming, she is the taste of dewberries. She is the temperature of my delirium. See, we are never to be trusted. None such as she. The last of her steps descending, I can hear the silence of Liliana. Without her soon it will be 1 hour, then 30 years. Gone the precision of her beauty, her humming the attic. For now between us the war is ended, a slat of light and a half-lit mirror. All that is left of the queen, but for her pillbox hat and tea-length dress. A memory of the yellow bodice, I live on in hope. Though for her to die beside me is not what I want, not exactly. Not if time is what we have a world of, not if the world is a bed I have made. What I'm working on now feels very different, as I guess it should, but I really am not sure what it's doing or what its real subject is. I'm very aware that there may only be one subject after all. But as I've told some of you, I left teaching, which is essentially all I've ever known, it's all I've ever done. And I took a job at the Episcopal Church, which I, even employed by them, still don't know very much about them. Though I was, received into that church a couple of years ago. And it was this sort of baffling turn of events, really, that I certainly couldn't have predicted. My title is Associate for Religion and the Arts. Nobody knows what it means, including myself. But the real mission, the real task, the vision, I think, of our rector, the sort of priest of all priests, was concerned that our parish, which is a large parish, was maybe losing some of their curiosity and their, we use this word earlier, elasticity, and that rather than doing more Bible study and more sermonizing, that maybe what people were missing, even if they didn't know they were missing it, maybe they needed something of the arts. They needed some stretching. They needed new questions. So it's a sort of miracle job. That seems sort of like a lot of pressure on me to do. For some, in some ways I have no real task. I have no real daily task. And yet my mission is to, save the souls of everyone that enters the Episcopal Church through poetry, with my only tool being poetry. So it's new, and I wasn't raised in a church and I don't know a lot, I didn't learn Bible stories as a child. And so my learning curve is really steep and it's really fascinating. I'm learning a lot. So I suspect that something of these poems have to do with learning a new sort of universe, a new rhythm. I don't know. That might be all that I can really explain about the poems, since they still feel very new to me. But I say that I went from talking to teenagers. I taught high school most recently, and I went from talking to 14-year-olds all day, talking exclusively to priests. So my whole world feels different. And interestingly, sort of in retrospect, to see the Queen is concerned in a lot of ways with divinity in ways that I don't know that I was totally aware of. I think I was always asking questions of God and what does it mean to exist and what happens when we die. But there was something, I realized that some of our knowledge is innermost, and you don't always know what you know until you write it. And that writing writing can sometimes create knowledge. In this case, reading what I had written was a way of recognizing that I did have some of this. I've had the same questions all my life, whether or not I was in a church or not. And so that's been interesting to me. I think for now, these new poems are reconciling somehow, or figuring out which me is me. You know, as Rumi says, of the thousands of me's, which me is me. It's probably the work of a lifetime, not really the work of a poem. So I brought 4 of these. They're just these little kind of weird vignettes. I'm interested in this bishop figure as a kind of metaphor for blurring the human with the divine. In the Episcopal Church, the bishop is the highest ordained person, sort of holiest, the priest of priests. And these poems were written in Italy, where I spent a spring on the border of Tuscany and Umbria, where everything felt holy and ancient and too beautiful to be earthly. So anyway, thank you for sort of indulging me with these. This first one, there's a word pax, P-A-X, which translates to peace, and then the shrubbery outside of St. Francis's, or the St. Francis Cathedral in Assisi. Pax is out of the lawn, peace. And then San Sepolcro is another city I visited. Don't know if any of that matters. Bishop of Artifacts. The wide blue air, Pax, a white moth in San Sepolcro. Outside the church, I stood on the cobblestones, and the beautiful woman wearing the yellow scarf told a story. These streets were made by hand, the width of one man's reach. A man on his knees, laying down a city, stone by stone. Inside, the bishop tells me of hidden, invisible artifacts. Milk from the Virgin, a lock of her hair, Christ's blood, his foreskin. And then the new roses in bloom, and lemon trees, blooms but no fruit. Bishop of Unfathomable Joy. There are days nothing seems to belong to me, not my body, not my knowledge, not my faith, and I feel as neutral as the milk glass sky, without softness, without light. Other days, I see them in their cars, whistling, and think, these people are the very image of God. And I rush through the air like an animal, charging the God bird, not knowing there is nothing to fear, until I am close enough to strike. Bishop of Vessels. Even though its true titles probably should just be like the dinner party, but I'm not doing a bishop thing, so everything has to be included. Bishop of Vessels or the dinner party. Bishop of dinner parties. They were all talking about an obscure film I likely will never see. We were eating lamb and artichoke, drinking Valrino, and they were also talking about politics in the Philippines. It was dusk, and we were being diminished, becoming darkness. I do not know if any of the stories people told were true. Most of them were about marriage and falseness. It was a dinner party, and it was noisy, and a man was trying to sleep with me, and still somehow I was led to a very particular knowledge, which I said aloud even though you were on the other side of the globe. I said, I love you enough to sleep on a mat at your feet for the rest of my life. Then I went home, and now it is years later, and who knows? I still feel incomplete, and I still feel I am never able to say the very thing I wish to say. I feel I am living in a fraction, which reminds me, there is a second, less than a second, when water being poured from one vessel into another vessel is in a state of being in neither, which is where I live. And then finally, Bishop of Infinity. A person, for example, can lie in her bed all afternoon or all her life and never know where the true center is. It's summer again. High sky and a persimmon tree, laundry baking on the line, and a bullfrog in the late morning among the tall grasses. There is no certainty except for me. Not in the world, not in the body. I cannot see certainly, though I trust reflection, the center of the small of my own back, the nape of my own neck, a soul. Evidence of the finite is also evidence of the infinite, and there is no such thing as nothing. Thank you all. Very good. I don't want to keep you longer than you wish to be kept. But if you have questions, I'm so happy to say something to respond. Yeah.
My question is in regard to your process. You talked a little bit about it earlier, saying that you can't write a book unless you're outside of it.
Yeah.
Which I think it's understandable. But at the same time, do you think that contributes at all to thinking about that, and then also thinking about that beautiful line of water passing us when you're kind of leaving that state? I guess my question is, because all your poems, well, most of them, I actually quite tough presenting that one wasn't in present tense.
Oh.
But do you think that the process of writing poetry in retrospect, but in present tense at another time, which is what I don't know, this process, do you think that contributes to this, this feeling of being one less? Because in one sense, you're here, as Alexander, for example, you wrote a poem about being back in this one town. You're no longer here, but you're no longer there, right? And it's, I guess, what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on time travel, suspensions.
This is coming from
no,
my process is often way too in the present. I think that I don't do enough of retrospective poetry. Pretty much all my poetry is how am I feeling right now? What am I seeing? What am I, so that that's how I kind of
I don't. That's really interesting sort of observation. That I don't know that I'm aware that I can. I can write notes, and then especially if if the world is sort of upside down, I'm not silent, and I might be writing something, images or fragments, but I'm not writing what I would consider poems. And I think because I am too, I think every brain, or maybe every writer, but probably every person has sort of a mad scribbler voice, and also this careful editor. And I think in some people, the scribbler has all the glory. The scribbler has the strength and power and is ruling your life. And then in other people, the editor is too strong. The editor is every time you go to say anything or write anything, your editor is that's stupid, shut up, so you have nothing to say. And so I think the true, your ideal way of being is, when those two are sort of happy marriage, that they can listen to one another. That you can honor both. And so sometimes I think my editor is often the strong one. And I often wish that it was opposite, that I had a little bit, that I felt a little bit freer. And maybe writing about the past is a way of feeling like I have more control, that I'm able to manage my experience or reframe the narrative of the past in a way that if I write in the present, it's a little too dangerous. Maybe it's riskier to write in the present. But when we say I would love to time travel, which seems to be the core of that question is don't you think we should time travel? And I say, yes, we should. And I'm also I'm an industrious sort of revisionist. Like I like revising, and I like revising in like drastic ways, like cutting in half. I'll count my words, and then especially if I don't think it's that good of a poem, and I just want to mess it up. I had a teacher say, let's just pour some ketchup in its hair, see what happens. Like, as soon as I pour ketchup in its hair, it means like starting from the end, using your last and your first line, or cutting it in half, or doing these sort of major surgeries. And I think sort of industrious revision like that can sometimes be really liberating. See, I have all the answers.
I don't know if you can see, there are a couple of hands up, but
I can't see
with
them.
them like that,
Hi.
so
Fine.
there you go.
So you mentioned in between describing two parts of the sections that you feel that you can't really write about the poetry while you're in the poetry.
Yeah.
Would that be just something that is personal to you, or do you think that's true of everyone? Because the reason I'm asking is because I actually, obviously I didn't have the same experience as you, but about a year and a half ago, I also had what would be counted as a psychotic break. And today's actually the anniversary of the day that I got off a suicide watch in a hospital. And so I was writing poetry. It probably wasn't my best, but I personally think that it's my strongest emotion.
Yeah.
And so would you say that that's more of a personal thing, or?
Yes.
Okay.
And I mean, and a lot of people think poetry is a kind of therapy. Like poetry is healing. That doesn't always feel true to, like sometimes poetry actually feels like the dangerous thing rather than the therapeutic thing. Sometimes don't you want to live your life without having to think about your life all the time?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard to have to think about stuff.
Okay.
But I acknowledge that that my process is, for one thing, really slow. It's also feels tedious to me. Sometimes I feel like I just sort of circle the same image over and over until it kind of drowns in itself. And I think if there are poets who are in a poem and can write a poem, that seems to be its own miracle.
The reason it stuck out to me is because I've noticed in my own writing, even when I'm writing about the same subject, it's different the longer time passes between the two.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily a bad difference.
Yeah.
And that stuck out to me because it was a very interesting way of phrasing it, and I like that how you phrased it. So.
And poems are kind of like prisms too, when they're working well, they're prisms, and you hold them one way, and they look one way, then your mood changes, or the weather is different, or and then suddenly things feel a whole lot different, and the poem even the tone seems different, or something has shifted. What seemed to be in the present moment is actually now in the past. So I think Henry James, the writer Henry James says, we do what we can, we work in the dark, the rest is the madness of art. Probably if there were rules, we would have them. What else? You all are so generous. Eye contact and your silence.
I was going to pertain.
You're going to.
Oh, I was just going to ask you you just kind of answered it with the whole poem circumstances thing.
Oh.
Because on the note of the first question, I was going to ask if you've ever had an experience where you've looked back at a poem and it's kind of predicted something or told you something about yourself you weren't willing to accept at the time, or you consciously didn't know at the time. Because that's happened to me before in my writing, and it always kind of freaks me out.
Yeah. I mean, even looking at this book, and not, and this is sort of a broad strokes thing, but reading all these poems and not knowing that I would one day work for a bunch of priests. in this vocation that is marrying the human with the divine. I could not have known that. And then reading this, even if when I haven't read some of these poems in a long time, I go back and I'm like, how did I know that? Or how did I even know to ask that question or use that word or something? I mean, that's sort of broadly speaking. And then, love poems get all blurry too. You kind of forget who was that. who was that one? Or your heart rate kind of gets blurred and then you kind of, I don't know. I mean, I think memory is so fuzzy and so, and even suffering doesn't always have like definite beginnings and endings. And so it's no wonder that we look back on something and it does seem fortuitous, that we wrote it when we did, or it seems somehow it's predicted some future self. And it is spooky. The world is haunted, and we're in a fairy tale, and it's a little bit scary. Yes.
So are you currently working just with the priests or with the congregation folks in
Both. Yeah. And it's not a typical church. It's huge. It's like a 2,000 member parish. There are 8 priests on staff and a rector. And it's my daily contact is mostly with clergy. And then, but we started a reading series. I write these weekly sort of meditations. They're like not scholarly enough to be called essays, but sort of poems. I pick a poem a week that I think would be sort of inviting as a way of sort of softening people. People are sort of generally afraid of poetry, and sometimes I think my work with the parish is to undo some of this fear, this anxiety that has to do with this, thinking that poetry is hiding something, or that there's some like real meaning that's not available to everybody. And I tell them sometimes about, I give these sort of lectures on like form or the point or pleasure, and I'll tell them about like music, and I'll say no one like turns on the radio and feels a new song comes on. No one's like, oh my God, what does this song mean? Or like, what key is this? But this just changed. Like, I can't understand that lyric. You don't have that with music, but somehow someone says, or even like reading a novel, people are much more flexible. But poetry, for some reason, tends to like heighten this sort of like self-consciousness, or so a lot of it is just this kind of gentling of or sort of turning away from a desire for certainty. Poetry, if anything, is a counter to false quickness and false certainty, which is probably what religion should be also, sort of patience and elasticity. So it's that sort of, that's sort of the difficulty of my job, is in this like abstract world, and then there are days I'm like, what is my daily, what do I do? So it's daily I'm talking to the clergy. It's a peculiar world.
Anyone else? All right, then we will clap loudly for you. If you want to be a photographer at a Allison Center Book or something afterwards, that's okay.
Oh, thank you.